My name is Madeline Carter. I'm 34 years old, living alone in an old wooden house I've spent nearly my entire youth trying to preserve after the fire years ago. That day was my birthday. My mother said she had a special gift for me. The whole family was gathered, the lights were soft and warm, the taste of cake still lingered on my tongue. I opened the envelope thinking it was the deed, my mother officially passing ownership of the house to me. But it wasn't. It was an eviction notice. Signed by my own mother. Why would a mother do that to her own daughter? Why was my sister standing next to her, smiling as if everything had been planned long ago? Have you ever been betrayed in your own home by the very people you loved most? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story speaks to you, like, subscribe and share the channel because this is only the beginning. I still remember the last afternoon I held my grandmother's hand in the hospital. She was so weak then, her voice barely a whisper, but her eyes were just as warm as they'd always been when I was little. She held my hand tightly, her frail fingers gently brushing mine, as if she were passing on an entire lifetime with that one touch. This house, keep it, sweetheart. I nodded, throat tight. I never imagined that simple promise would lead me into the fiercest battle of my life. The house had nearly burned to the ground in an electrical fire. When she passed, all that remained was a charred wooden frame, a leaking roof, cracked walls, and memories hanging in the air like smoke. Everyone told me to sell it. My mother said bluntly, "It's not worth it, sweetheart. It's just the skeleton of a memory. Let it go." But to me it wasn't just a house. It was where I grew up. Where she knit scarves every winter afternoon. Where I first learned to bake cookies without burning down the kitchen. Where I sat waiting on long nights for my mother to return from late shifts she never made home on time. It was the only real home I had ever known. So I stayed. I scraped together every paycheck from my construction jobs, took on weekend shifts, and taught architecture drawing at a community college at night just to make ends meet. I lived in that broken house for 2 winters with nothing but a wood stove and hot water boiled in an electric kettle. I taught myself to fix the plumbing, patch cracks in the wall, retile the bathroom floor. No one helped. Courtney would text me photos of herself at parties, at restaurants glowing with candlelight. "I don't get why you live like that," she'd say, her tone half pity, half mockery. My mother always had the same look of concern. "Madeline, you're punishing yourself for something that's already gone. You're an engineer, you could be living in a brand new condo. Comfortable, modern." I would just smile faintly. They called me a dreamer, someone clinging to the past. Courtney even said once, "You're living like someone abandoned, hanging on to a pile of scorched wood." For what? I never responded. I just kept working, rebuilding each frame, resetting every plank, scrubbing away the smoke until the house could breathe again with that warm scent of pine from my childhood. By the 5th year, I'd finally finished the basement and kitchen. Everything was up to code with the proper permits, safety inspections, and neatly filed records tucked under the stairs. I even replanted the back garden with the same flowers Grandma loved: lavender, white daisies, and wild jasmine. While reorganizing the attic bedroom, I found an old folder wrapped in a handkerchief, hidden in a drawer behind the fireplace. Inside was a copy of the property deed, along with a handwritten letter from my grandmother. "Madeline, I want you to have a place where you belong. This house is yours and yours alone. Your mother's name is still on the paperwork, but I've made my wishes clear to my attorney. If anything happens to me, go to Mr. Wallace's law office on 5th Street. I read the letter over and over, crying so hard I could barely breathe. For years, I had believed Grandma wanted me to keep this house. And now I had proof. But life swept me up. A new job. Construction projects out of state. I never got to see Mr. Wallace before he retired. His office changed hands and the original documents vanished. I asked my mother about transferring the deed. She sighed, avoided my eyes, said she'd consider it when the time was right. Courtney dismissed it altogether. Paperwork doesn't mean anything. What matters is who actually takes responsibility for the house. I didn't press. I believed my work, my time, and the love I poured into every brick would speak for itself. Until that birthday. When that cold letter lay folded in a silver envelope. When my mother turned away and Courtney held hands with Dean, a man I had never trusted. That was the moment I realized the past I tried so hard to preserve had become their target. And all the years I lived, worked, sacrificed, it was all considered unofficial. But they forgot one thing. I'm no longer the little girl waiting by the window for her mother to come home. I've grown up. And this time I'm not backing down. I stood frozen in the living room, the eviction notice still lying beside an untouched birthday cake. My mother sat in the armchair, hands clasped tightly, eyes avoiding mine. Courtney stood behind her, one arm draped across her shoulder like she was protecting a fragile child. Dean stood with his arms crossed, leaning against the old bookcase that once belonged to Grandma, the same one I'd refinished just a few months earlier. Madeline, my mother finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper, you have to understand, this isn't your house. You were just staying here temporarily. I spun toward her. Temporarily? Did you really just say that? She swallowed hard. The deed is still in my name. You don't have any official paperwork. And I think it's time Courtney had a stable place to begin her life with Dean. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. Stable? What about me? I've poured 5 years of sweat and tears into this house and you didn't notice. Courtney raised her chin, her voice sharp. You chose this life. No one asked you to sacrifice. We're just trying to move the family forward. Dean works in urban development and this neighborhood is scheduled for redevelopment. Holding on to it is only slowing progress. Dean nodded like it all made perfect sense. We can transform this area. Increase its value. Investors are very interested. I let out a bitter laugh. So I'm supposed to walk away so you can build a project over the same ground where my grandmother once planted lavender? My mother remained silent, her eyes on the floor. Courtney spoke again, her voice laced with mock sympathy. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. I told Mom you'd react like this. But some things can't wait anymore. You renovated without permits. Neighbors have complained about noise. Dean checked. It looks like there are structural concerns. I turned to Dean. Are you a structural engineer? He shrugged. I've got experience in development. I know what violations look like. And do you know what fraud looks like? I said coldly, locking eyes with him. Courtney took a step closer, her voice now icy. Stop blaming everyone else just because you don't have legal ownership. You were only staying here because Mom felt sorry for you. I looked at my mother. Is that true, Mom? She said nothing. I gave a dry, hollow laugh. Or was it because I was the only one willing to stay behind and keep this house from falling apart? Dean let out a sigh. Madeline, think of this as an opportunity. If you leave peacefully, we can help cover part of the moving costs. Or you can choose to take the legal route, but I don't think you want that. You think I'm afraid? No. I think you don't have anything to prove your case. I didn't answer. I just bent down and picked up the eviction notice again, my eyes stopping at the final signature. Sharon E. Carter. My mother's signature. The woman who once promised to honor my grandmother's wishes. The woman who held my hand when Grandma passed. The woman now selling out that promise for the price of a high-end condo development. I turned and walked toward the door. Courtney called after me. You have 30 days. If you go past that, the company's lawyer will step in. Good, I said without turning back. I look forward to it. I pulled out my phone as soon as I stepped outside the gate and called Naomi. Where are you? I asked. Just left the courthouse. What's going on? I'm being kicked out of my house. There was silence for a few seconds. You're kidding. I'm not. Courtney, Dean, and even my mom, they handed me the eviction notice right in the middle of my birthday party. Oh my God, Maddie. I'm on my way. 15 minutes later, Naomi walked into my house with her usual purposeful stride. She was always like that, calm, razor-sharp, and fiercely loyal. She placed her briefcase on the kitchen table, glancing around the house she'd visited hundreds of times since high school. I need to see the paperwork. I handed her the eviction notice. She scanned it quickly, then looked up. This is a standard notice for a tenant without a lease. They're treating you like an undocumented renter. That's right. And what's their basis for eviction? They're claiming unauthorized renovations, neighbor complaints, and that I don't have legal ownership. Naomi pinched the edge of the document, her voice slow but firm. I'll need to see all construction records, permits, blueprints, receipts, photos. They're all filed in the drawer under the stairs. And they gave you 30 days? I nodded. Naomi stood up. Good. Then we've got 29 days to prove who the real violator is. I looked at my friend, my voice catching. Naomi, They're trying to take everything. She stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. They won't. If you want to fight, I'll fight with you. Every step of the way. I sank into a chair, legs weak, but something warm began to return inside me. Courtney might have Dean. She might have my mother's backing. She might have all her carefully crafted lies. But I had Naomi. And I had the truth. And the truth, when exposed the right way, is something no one can walk over. Naomi sat cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by stacks of documents I'd kept for years. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting a soft glow on her curly brown hair. She flipped through papers, making notes, highlighting dates. I sat beside her, still shaking as I gripped a warm cup of tea, my heart thundering. "Look at this," Naomi said, holding out a faded yellow document. "This is the neighbor complaint your mom gave you, right?" I nodded, remembering how Sharon had laid the papers on the table with the weight of a judge handing down a sentence. "There are two problems," Naomi said calmly. "First, the signature, supposedly from Mr. Geller, the neighbor east of your house, doesn't match the one he used on a permit request for a backyard barbecue last year. I pulled that from the city system. Second, the date of the complaint lines up with the exact time he was in the hospital recovering from knee surgery." I clutched my tea. "So, they forged it?" Naomi looked up at me. "We can't say for certain yet. But there's more than enough reason to investigate. And if this was forged to manipulate property ownership, that's serious fraud." I nodded slowly, heart pounding. "Do you think Dean is involved?" Naomi opened her laptop, typed for a moment, then turned the screen toward me. An old article popped up, featuring a photo I couldn't mistake. Dean, neatly groomed in a gray suit, shaking hands at a press event. The headline read, "Cypress Development Executive Resigns After Elderwood Property Scandal." I gasped. "Cypress Development?" Naomi nodded. 3 years ago, they were investigated for coercing elderly homeowners to sign over properties by falsifying medical documents and impersonating neighbors. Dean was one of 3 mid-level employees who quietly resigned. No charges were filed, but the records are still there. I leaned back in my chair, the room tilting slightly. "You think this is the same playbook?" Naomi didn't answer right away. She nodded slowly. "You live in a prime location for redevelopment. Large lot. Historic house. Between 2 main streets. They don't want to fix it up, they want to tear it down. And Courtney, my mother, Dean, they're all in on this?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Naomi didn't reply immediately. She picked up the stack of documentation I had carefully preserved: material receipts, design plans, renovation permits, city planning approvals. All with official stamps, tracking numbers, and clear timelines. "Madeline, this right here is gold," she said. "If you have photos of the renovation process, video clips, recordings of your conversations with contractors, you've got a bulletproof defense. The only issue..." She paused. I looked at her. "What?" "If Dean and Courtney have done this before, like at Elderwood, then they're not just trying to steal your house. They've probably prepared a whole web of paperwork to make your removal look legitimate. They won't leave loose ends." I clenched my hands. "Then we find what they didn't cover." That night I started a new habit. Every time someone knocked at the door, I kept my phone recording in my jacket pocket. I took photos of everything. Old scratches on the banister, the batch number on the cement bags I used, the delivery dates on the receipts for paint and lumber. I pulled up the footage from the old backdoor camera I'd once installed just to watch for raccoons. Naomi helped me extract clips by date. We found one where Dean slipped into my backyard just before sunrise, holding what looked like a zoning map. It wasn't crystal clear, but it was still something. Naomi called me to meet her at a little cafe near her firm. On the table was a thick folder. She pointed to the name printed in bold at the top: Cypress Development. They just submitted a rezoning proposal for this area, aiming to build a 3-story apartment complex, over 40 high-end units. And the centerpiece of the project. She looked at me. "Your lot." I froze. "They already submitted it?" 3 weeks ago, Naomi said, handing me a printout from the city's planning system. "And guess who signed as the development rep? Dean." A chill crept slowly from the back of my neck down my spine. Everything had been arranged in advance. That talk about helping my sister settle down was just a well-wrapped excuse. What they did wasn't about family anymore. It was business. Naomi placed her hand on the file. I need you to stay calm. Our next steps are filing a petition to suspend the zoning proposal, submitting a formal complaint for property fraud, and if necessary, initiating a report for document forgery. I nodded slowly but firmly. I'm seeing this through. Naomi looked at me for a long moment, then smiled slightly. Good. Because I think we just found a path to bring all of this into the light. I went to the bank on a gray Tuesday morning. A fine mist of rain clung to my windshield, blurring the road ahead like it was wrapped in fog. I held the envelope of personal documents tightly, my chest filled with both anticipation and dread. The lobby was quiet. I explained to the receptionist that I wanted to review mortgage and title transfer records related to my grandmother's house. The teller, a woman named Angie, offered a polite smile and invited me to wait in the personal records room. About 10 minutes later, she returned holding a thick file. We found the request to transfer ownership from Evelyn Carter to you, Angie said, placing the folder on the table. It was submitted 6 years ago. I opened it with trembling hands. It was definitely my grandmother's handwriting, round, slightly tilted to the right, each line neat and deliberate. Transfer of ownership for 411 East Cedar Street to my granddaughter Madeline Carter, she had written. Because she is the only one who cared for me in my final years and the one I trust to keep this home. My throat tightened. But then Angie turned to the last page. However, she said gently, this file was never fully processed. I looked up. Why not? A withdrawal form was submitted about 2 weeks later. I blinked. Who submitted it? It's also signed under Evelyn Carter's name. I froze. Angie handed me the withdrawal document. The signature at the bottom wasn't my grandmother's. The strokes were sharper, more compact, missing the soft curves and characteristic rightward tilt. But I recognized it. I had seen it hundreds of times. On birthday cards, on scholarship applications, on little sticky notes Courtney used to leave on the fridge in college. My heart pounded in my chest. Can you provide a notarized copy of this document? I asked, my voice hoarse. Angie nodded. Of course. But if you suspect forgery, I recommend reporting it and bringing your lawyer. I thanked her and stepped back into the street under the cold drizzle. My hands shook so badly I had to stop at the curb and take a deep breath. I called Naomi. She picked up almost immediately. Well, I found the original title transfer form, I said quickly. My grandmother did file it, clearly stating she wanted to leave the house to me. But 2 weeks later there was a withdrawal. And the signature, it's Courtney's. Naomi didn't respond right away. I heard the wind through her phone, then the sound of her office door closing. Do you have a copy? I'm holding it now. The notarized version will be ready tomorrow. Madeline, her voice slowed and took on a serious tone. If we can prove that signature isn't your grandmother's, then Courtney forged a legal document. Under Washington state law, that's a felony. She could face criminal charges. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, lips pressed into a line. So what's next? We need a signature analysis. And a witness. If anyone saw your grandmother sign it or heard her express her intentions, they can testify. I closed my eyes. One person came to mind. Hattie, Grandma's best friend. She used to be a notary. Naomi didn't hesitate. Perfect. Find her as soon as you can. Meanwhile, I'll forward the documents to a handwriting expert I know. We need to move fast before Courtney strikes back. That afternoon I drove to Ms. Hattie's house in the suburbs. Her small home sat nestled between blooming plum trees, quiet and warm like a memory. She greeted me with surprise and concern. Madeline, you look pale, dear. What's going on? I didn't waste time. I handed her the photocopy of the withdrawal document. Do you recognize the signature? Hattie held the paper close, studied it, then set it down. That's not Evelyn's handwriting. Evelyn always slanted her writing slightly to the right and added a little dot at the end of her name. This is a completely different pen stroke. My throat tightened. Did she ever talk to you about transferring the house to me? She nodded, her clouded eyes suddenly sharp. Yes. She told me very clearly right after you began the renovations. She said, Madeline's the one who truly loves this house, not Sharon or Courtney. I was there when she signed the document. I grabbed her hand, overcome with gratitude. Would you be willing to make a sworn statement? Testify. I will. Evelyn can't speak for herself anymore, but I can. That night when I returned home, I laid everything out on the table. The original title transfer, the forged withdrawal, the witness statement, and the bank documents. I looked around the familiar house, the one I had painted brick by brick, nailed shelf by shelf, repaired pipe by pipe. And I realized they didn't just want this house. They wanted to erase my name from everything that ever tied me to it. But I was ready. Because if I didn't hold on to the truth, no one else would. The lakeside resort where Courtney's wedding was being held was so flawlessly pristine, it took my breath away the moment I stepped out of the car. White flower arches trimmed to perfection, rows of silk-covered chairs lined neatly toward the glimmering lake under the late afternoon sun. Everything looked expensive, refined, untouched. But I knew, the truth was buried right beneath that polished surface, waiting to erupt. I pulled my coat tight around me, hand trembling as I gripped the USB drive in my pocket. It held everything. Video of Dean sneaking into my backyard, an audio recording of Courtney and my mother discussing how to get that house taken care of, images of the original and forged withdrawal documents, and Hattie's testimony recorded under a lawyer's supervision. Naomi had been clear. To bring them down, it's not enough to have proof. You have to hit at the right moment, when it counts. I walked into the main hall of the resort, where guests milled about, sipping champagne. Courtney, radiant in her crystal-embellished wedding gown, stood with Dean at the reception table, smiling as if deceit had never touched her life. Naomi had arrived earlier, mingling with the crowd of business investors near the West Lounge. She gave me a subtle nod before slipping toward the stage, where the tech team had already set up the presentation system for speeches and slideshow videos. Jordan appeared right behind me, carrying his large camera, 3 gear bags slung over his shoulder. He wore a black shirt and loose tie, blending in as a typical event photographer. No one paid him any mind. But I knew. Inside his bags was a hard drive with full data backups and a wireless projection kit Naomi had arranged. Jordan gave me a slight nod. Are you sure you want to go through with this? I looked over at Courtney, surrounded by her wealthy friends, her eyes shimmering with fake delight. She chose her wedding day to destroy me. I'm just returning what she sent out. Jordan nodded, pulled out his phone and sent a short message. Seconds later, Naomi responded with the signal. All set. I walked over to Sharon. She was speaking with a woman in a purple velvet dress who looked like a distant relative. When Sharon turned to me, she looked slightly surprised. You made it, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Of course, I replied calmly. I submitted my speech to the organizers. They told me the family speech slot was still open, so I asked to take it. Sharon frowned. Courtney said Aunt Elaine was doing that part. She texted me last night, said she changed her mind. Told me, it would be better if you gave the speech as a way to start healing things. I lied without blinking. And maybe because she was too busy with the wedding, or wanted to appear gracious in front of the guests, Sharon simply nodded. Then go ahead. Just don't embarrass Courtney. I won't, I said, turning away without another word. When the reception began, I sat at the table closest to the stage. Naomi and Jordan were posted on opposite sides of the room. I could feel my heartbeat pounding so loudly I was sure everyone around me could hear it. Courtney and Dean entered to applause, beaming as they stepped onto the stage. I stood just as the MC announced the next segment. Please welcome the bride's sister, Madeline Carter. A few heads turned, most with mild curiosity. I walked up, holding the mic in my right hand and the USB drive tight in my coat pocket with my left. Naomi gave a subtle cue to the technician at the side of the stage. Jordan activated the remote transmitter. The screen behind the stage went dark. Then a simple message appeared. Before the well wishes, I'd like to share a story. My voice echoed clearly across the large room. I'm the bride's sister, and once believed that blood ties were unbreakable. Until I realized some things are even more fragile than promises, like trust. I turned toward the screen. The first video appeared. Dean stepping over the fence into my backyard at 5 a.m., holding a zoning map. Murmurs rippled through the room. Courtney jumped to her feet. What the hell are you doing? I ignored her. Next is an audio clip of my sister, the bride today, speaking to my mother about how to get me out of the house, because That property sits right in the center of the new development plan. The recording played. Courtney's voice echoed through the speakers. If she doesn't agree to move out, then we'll need to give them a reason. I already took care of the paperwork. They'll believe it if it comes from Mom. The room fell into a stunned silence. I turned to Courtney. This is your big day. But for me, it's the day I reclaim justice. Dean stormed forward, ripping the mic from my hand. This is all lies. He made it up. This is a wedding, not a courtroom. Naomi rose from her seat, holding a thick stack of documents. And these are the copies of legal records, including a suspected forged signature, tampered mortgage files, and a complaint faked in a neighbor's name. All verified by an independent legal handwriting analyst. I stepped back as Courtney and Dean stood frozen, pale as paper. I knew this moment would change everything. But it was the truth, and it had just been revealed at the very event they thought would mark their victory. The air in the room was thick after Naomi placed the stack of papers in front of the event coordinators. I remained on stage, gripping the microphone, watching stunned faces glued to the screen behind me. I apologize for interrupting the celebration, I said, voice measured and steady. But if today marks the beginning of my sister's new life, then everyone here deserves to know what she did to get it. The murmurs swelled, rustling through the room like wind through dry leaves. I nodded toward Jordan. He pressed the next button on the remote. The screen changed to read, Email exchange between Dean Matthews and Cypress Development, February 8th. The email text appeared line by line. I convinced her mother to sign the forms. Her sister still thinks the house is hers, but legally, if her name's not on the deed, she's nobody. We'll have her out by March. Project remains on track. A heavy-set man near the central table shot up, voice sharp. Cypress Development? Dean, you told me you left them. Dean went pale, his fists clenched. I haven't worked with them, not in a long time. Then why was this email sent from the company's address and copied to the project director? Naomi called out from across the room. Without waiting for a reply, I gave Jordan the next signal. The video changed. Courtney's voice rang out, mocking and cold. She thinks she's so noble, clinging to that rotten old house like it's a treasure. Even better, makes it easier. Let her put in all the work restoring it, then we just have Mom sign a paper and it's done. A gasp sounded from the back. Aunt Elaine covered her mouth, and a few of Courtney's friends exchanged uneasy glances. I caught a glimpse of Sharon standing utterly still, eyes wide, lips pressed together, too shocked to speak. I continued. And here's the original property transfer form signed by my grandmother, followed by the withdrawal filed 2 weeks later. Handwriting experts confirmed. They were signed by 2 different people. The forged signature was identified as Courtney Carter's. Naomi held up the enlarged handwriting comparison alongside the expert's conclusion. The room fell silent again, like witnesses to a slow-moving crash no one could stop. Then Courtney stumbled back a step, grabbed the back of a chair and collapsed onto the carpet, her wedding dress fanning out like a puddle of white melting into the floor. People rushed toward her. Sharon dropped to her knees, cradling her daughter, panicked and calling her name. Dean shouted, "You're trying to ruin our lives." He charged toward the stage, straight at Jordan holding the projector remote. His eyes were bloodshot, jaw clenched. "Dean, stop." Sharon screamed, but he didn't hear her. Jordan stepped back quickly, but Dean lunged with his fist raised. He didn't reach him. In a split second, 2 men in black suits, resort security, tackled him to the floor. "Let me go," Dean shouted. "It's all fake. It's a setup. You just assaulted someone in a public event," one of the guards said, pulling out a radio. "We're detaining you until local authorities arrive." Dean thrashed in vain. Sweat poured down his face, his skin flushed from rage and fear. Courtney still lay unconscious in her mother's arms. A nurse attending the wedding rushed over and checked her vitals, then nodded, saying she'd only fainted from shock. I stepped off the stage slowly. It felt like I had said something that couldn't be taken back, couldn't be undone. But I didn't regret it. An older woman, one of my grandmother's longtime friends, approached me. She took my hand, her eyes steady and kind. "Evelyn would be so proud of you," she said. I nodded, unable to speak. From across the room, I saw a group of 3 men in suits quietly retreat. One of them was the investor representative who had appeared at the Cyprus press conference last year. He shook his head, whispered something to his colleagues, then walked straight out the door without saying a word to Courtney's family. I turned to Naomi. "We did it," I whispered. Naomi looked at me, her eyes quiet but burning. They haven't fallen completely. But this was the first punch. And it landed deep enough to shake the foundation. I glanced back at Courtney, who was slowly coming to amid the chaos. Sharon tried to stay composed, cradling her daughter while casting me a look mixed with shame, confusion, and something I'd never seen in her before, maybe regret. I stepped back, not intruding. Because now the truth no longer needed me to protect it. It had walked into the light on its own, under the harshest spotlight, undeniable and unhidden. And everyone had seen it. The courtroom wasn't large, but it felt like every fluorescent bulb above was bearing down on me. To my right was Naomi, her hand resting lightly on a thick folder, her eyes sharp and unwavering. Across the room, my mother sat between two lawyers in gray suits, her face no longer carrying its usual edge but a thinly veiled tension. Courtney wasn't present. According to her attorney, she was recovering from emotional trauma, at home. I didn't care. The judge was a middle-aged woman with silver-gray hair neatly pinned back and reading glasses perched on her nose. She scanned the case summary before looking directly at me. Plaintiff Sharon Carter has filed suit against her daughter, Madeline Carter, for unlawful occupation of the property. Response from the defense. Naomi rose, her voice steady and clear. Your Honor, we reject this claim entirely. My client is not only the sole resident and caretaker of the home for over 5 years, but also the direct intended heir of her late grandmother, Evelyn Carter, whose wishes are documented in writing. The judge nodded. Evidence. Naomi didn't rush. She calmly opened the file and presented each document. A copy of the property transfer signed by Evelyn Carter, the forged withdrawal with mismatched handwriting, an expert handwriting analysis, and a sworn statement from the bank employee verifying the timeline of submission and cancellation. Each document was numbered, time-stamped, and attached with official case references. We also submit video testimony from Ms. Hattie Lewis, a notary public who confirmed witnessing the original signature, and a handwriting comparison report using samples provided by the City Records Office, Naomi continued. Additionally, we hired an independent investigator who found that several documents used in the eviction filing were altered and not submitted through lawful channels. The judge turned to my mother's attorneys. The man seated next to Sharon stood, trying to maintain a neutral tone. Your Honor, our client, Mrs. Sharon Carter, believes that Evelyn Carter intended to retain ownership within the family, though legal transfer was never completed. Mrs. Carter has maintained tax payments and property records for many years. Naomi responded immediately, her tone calm but firm. Then why did Mrs. Carter allow her daughter to fully renovate, repair, and maintain the property without a lease agreement? Why was a withdrawal form with a forged signature filed 2 weeks after Evelyn Carter passed away? Why does her other daughter, Courtney Carter, appear in the new zoning application as an investment partner with a real estate developer? The plaintiff's lawyer faltered, dodging the question. Sharon stared down at the polished wood table, saying nothing. Your Honor, Naomi added, this is no longer a simple property dispute. This is a deliberate scheme to fraudulently seize ownership through document forgery, manipulation of familial trust, and exploitation of legal loopholes. Without timely intervention, someone like my client would be pushed out onto the street, despite being the only person who preserved the true value of that home. The judge leaned back in her chair, flipping through the files for what felt like ages. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the sound of pages turning. At last, she looked directly at my mother. Mrs. Sharon Carter, do you have anything to say? My mother looked up. Her eyes were red, but her voice tried to retain composure. I thought I was doing what was best. Courtney was starting her own family, and I believed the house could serve a greater purpose. I didn't think it would go this far. The judge raised an eyebrow. And do you deny that your daughter, Courtney Carter, had contact with the real estate development firm Cyprus Development, where her fiancé was previously employed? My mother remained silent. In that case, the court hereby suspends any enforcement or eviction actions against the defendant, Madeline Carter, the judge declared. and simultaneously initiates an investigation into potential forgery relating to the unauthorized withdrawal of the property transfer. While the matter is under formal review, the defendant will retain the right to reside in and maintain the home. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I turned to Naomi. She gave me a slight nod. Her hand found mine and gripped it firmly. When the hearing ended, I stood slowly and walked out into the hallway, feeling as if I had just left a room without air. Sharon passed by me without a word. Just before she disappeared behind the courtroom doors, she paused without turning and said just loud enough for me to hear, "You're more like your grandmother than I ever realized." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Out in the corridor, Naomi made a call. It went according to plan. The court froze the eviction and is preparing for criminal investigation into forgery. She's safe now. I looked up at the cold white ceiling and closed my eyes for a moment, to breathe. Not from relief, but because I knew the hardest part was just beginning, reclaiming not just the house, but the truth that had been buried under the name of family. My home had found its breath again. But this time, it breathed in rhythm with the people who truly wanted to preserve its warmth, not tear it down to pour concrete over memories. I started repairs again, beginning with the back porch, the place Dean had once marked in red paint as if it were dead ground. But beneath those worn wooden planks were my memories with Grandma. Summer afternoons shelling peas, the wind rustling through the eaves, the smell of cornbread drifting from the kitchen. Naomi was the first to help me pry up each rotted board, her hands coated in dust without a single complaint. "You should leave this hook up," she said, pointing to a rusty, crooked hanger. "Why?" I asked. "Because it's where you used to hang your backpack after school." She smiled, eyes twinkling. "I remember. Your bag was always twice your size." I laughed. Real laughter, for the first time in weeks full of tears and tension. What I didn't expect was the following Tuesday morning, Sharon showed up. She hadn't called. She just appeared at the door holding a box of homemade apple pie, her eyes quiet and tired. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," she said as I opened the door. "I just want to do my part." I said nothing and stepped aside. She sat down in the old chair by the window, the one she used to sit in reading the newspaper on winter mornings when I was little. She set the box on the table and pulled a folder from her purse. It was the signed property transfer form. "You wanted me to make it public. I understand." "I will," she said, her voice trembling. "I signed it at the law office this morning. Naomi will receive the notarized copy this afternoon." I still hadn't spoken. She looked at me for a long time. I know I was wrong. I let fear make my choices. Fear of not having money. Fear of being blamed. Fear of disappointing Courtney. Dean offered an easy way forward and I didn't ask questions. I didn't check. I just went along. I sat across from her, my hands folded on the table, eyes no longer filled with anger, but not quite ready to forgive either. "You can say sorry as many times as you want, but it doesn't change what you did," I said, my voice calm. "But if you truly want to make it right, then act." She nodded. "Let me help fix the house. At least part of it." I agreed. Not because I had fully forgiven her, but because I knew that the greatest restoration doesn't always come from bricks or paint. It comes from people's hearts. And then the things I never expected began to happen. Geller, the neighbor on the left, normally stern and never one for more than 3 words, brought over an old toolbox. "Young lady, I've got this wood planer that belonged to Evelyn's husband. Keep it. He used it to build the kitchen bookshelf." Mary from across the street, the one who used to invite me to neighborhood meetings and whom Courtney labeled the annoying neighbor, brought a pot of lavender, the same kind my grandmother once planted. I figured the kitchen window could use a little more fragrance. Even the younger folks, who I once thought never paid attention, stopped to help when they saw me repainting the fence. They asked questions, then came back with brushes, ladders, even snacks. Sharon, who once never touched anything more manual than a stand mixer, was now carefully removing old bricks from the porch steps to replace them with new ones I had picked. She was clumsy, awkward, dropped bricks and scraped her hands more than once. But she didn't quit. One afternoon, I sat in the living room wiping down family photo frames when Naomi came in holding 2 glasses of iced lemonade. She looked around, then said quietly, "Doesn't look like a house someone once planned to demolish anymore, huh?" I smiled and gently placed my grandmother's photo in the center of the shelf. "No. Now it feels like home. She came closer and sat beside me. You think Sharon's really changed? I paused before answering. Maybe not entirely, but at least she chose to stay and repair. And some cracks can only be mended from the inside. We sat side by side, watching the golden light of late afternoons spill through the windows onto the freshly polished hardwood floors. In the backyard, I could hear Sharon talking to Mr. Geller about fixing the front steps. I couldn't make out her words, but her tone, softer, more humble than I'd ever heard it, told me everything. That, to me, was a beginning. 1 year after the court hearing, my house didn't just stand strong. It breathed again, quietly and gently. The white picket fence out front was now adorned with blooming purple bougainvillea. The new porch was built with pine wood from Mr. Simmons' workshop, the same carpenter who once worked for my grandmother in the 80s. The window panes were so clear they reflected the soft June sky, its warmth and calm like a whisper from the past. I stood in the backyard holding a handwritten guest list, names that, just a year ago, no one would have imagined sitting together at a wooden table laid across the lawn. Naomi arrived early as always. She walked into the yard in a pale gray dress, carrying 2 trays of fruit tarts and a stack of folders tucked into a leather bag. Still working even on party day? I teased, taking the trays from her. He shrugged. Some people wear floral dresses. Some defend low-income housing rights. I'm in the latter camp. I laughed. Naomi was now a full-time attorney for a community housing legal program. Her name had recently been mentioned in an article about landmark victories across King County. You've changed a lot of people, I said as we set up chairs and tables together. She tilted her head, grinning. But the first person I chose not to give up on was you. Guests began to arrive as the clock struck 4. Mary showed up with 2 trays of empanadas and Mr. Geller brought a jug of mint-infused peach tea. The two of them, who once couldn't agree on anything after a decade of being neighbors, now chatted like old friends. I saw familiar faces. People who had once doubted me stayed silent when my family tried to force me out, now carrying flowers, cookies, and warm wishes that didn't feel rehearsed. They came not because it was a judgment day, but because it was a homecoming. Sharon arrived late. She didn't dress up, just a tan button-down and slacks, holding a small wooden box. I knew instantly what it was. She walked past everyone without much conversation, only nodding and smiling softly, heading straight to the living room. I stood on the porch watching her, her presence quiet but steadier than the day I saw her in court. A few minutes later, she returned empty-handed and met my gaze. I put it back in its place, she said, next to Evelyn's photo. I nodded. I didn't need to ask. I knew she meant the antique walnut clock she once tried to sell behind my back to cover her debts. I stepped into the room. The clock sat firmly on the shelf, its slow, steady ticking like the calm heartbeat of an old soul napping in the sun. Beside it was my grandmother's photo, her face turned toward me, smiling just as gently as she always had. I opened the window of her old room. A breeze floated in, carrying the scent of jasmine from the porch flower bed, the same kind she used to plant when I was little. Across the yard, kids ran around, laughter mixing with the clinking of spoons and glasses. Naomi was chatting with a group of young law students, telling them about her latest case. Sharon was still talking to Mr. Geller, her face soft, the trace of a smile I hadn't seen in years flickering in her eyes. I sat by the window, the steam of my lemon tea curling upward from the cup in my hands. I didn't feel like I needed validation for the journey I had taken. The house was speaking for me now, through its very revival. Each wall repainted, each brick relayed, each chair handcrafted, not as a show of wealth but as a tribute to memory. And what mattered most wasn't what I had restored, but who had returned and chosen to stay without needing promises. Someone once asked me if I still held anger toward Sharon. I just smiled. Anger can't build a home, but resolve can. And trust, when rebuilt from broken pieces, is sometimes stronger than the original. I took a sip of tea, eyes wandering to the garden. Grandma once said, just care for the soil and the flowers will bloom on their own. And today I believe she was right. I'm telling this story not to reopen wounds, but to share a journey I know many of us have walked. A journey of fighting for what's ours, not just with legal rights but with heart. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Have you ever stood on the edge of loss and resilience and chosen to stay, even when everyone said to walk away? If you have, share it with me. I'd love to listen. Because sometimes just knowing we're not alone in our battle is enough to keep going. And if my story moved you, or reminded you of something deep within, don't forget to follow the channel. I'm still writing. Not just about this house, but about life, about family collisions, and about the quiet moments of healing we often overlook. Because every home has a story. And sometimes the things that seem shattered are where something better begins.